They drive big trucks, they go mudding, and they love their God and their guns. They have smash hit TV series and perform some of the most popular music in the world. I'm talking, of course, about Rednecks. Rednecks are often celebrated as a staple of American life. But they are also the object of elitist mockery and condescending derision.
And so that's partly him playing to their base and playing to their audience, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's a smart one and y'all elitists are dumb.
You elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling, even though
your math and your reading.
Yeah, you're reading, your geography, knowing other countries, sipping your latte.
All those lines on the map.
Only them.
But what many don't know is that rednecks have actually become a powerful political force, inspiring millions around the globe to rise up in defense of faith, family, and freedom, and change the world like never before. The term redneck dates back to the early 1800s, alluding to the sunburned necks of rural farmers who spent long hours in the hot sun. Since then, who actually counts as a redneck? Well, let's just say it's gone through a number of changes. Early 20th century coal miners who wore red bandanas around their necks, labor union advocates, even Presbyterians living in North Carolina. But the term today is used most commonly to describe rural Americans who love God, guns, and country, and most especially camouflage and pickup trucks. Unfortunately, inaccurate stereotypes abound regarding rednecks. Perhaps the most common assumption among cosmopolitan elites is that rural folk are generally uneducated and even illiterate. But such stereotypes are far removed from the facts. Students from America's rural communities actually graduate from high school at rates higher than the national average. Fully 80% of rural students finish 12th grade, which is virtually identical with the 81% who graduate from the more prosperous suburban schools. Moreover, rural students consistently score better in standardized testing than do students in metro and urban areas. The difference lies in the fact that rural students, unlike their cosmopolitan counterparts, are not particularly inclined to go to college. Just 19% of rural Americans hold a bachelor's degree, compared with the nationwide average of 33%. Now, that statistic alone accounts for the unique way in which rural America keeps its conservative traditions alive, particularly its religious traditions. Scholars have found that leftist and liberal sentiments are disproportionately fostered among those who spend several years on a college campus, while those who forgo such an experience overwhelmingly retain their traditional values of faith, family, and freedom. And no one exemplifies that retention more than rednecks. It's no coincidence that the nation's 10 most religious states correspond almost exactly to what have been designated as the most redneck travel destinations in the country. Moreover, while populations in rural counties have always had more children than cosmopolitan populations, that gap has grown significantly over the last decade as urban metro areas have embraced liberal values all the more. Back in 2007, birth rates among rural populations were just 5% more than in metro counties. But that fertility advantage has surged to 14% today, a 300% increase in just over a decade. Scholars recognize that rising birth rates among more religious rural folk and declining birth rates among more secular metro folk are already beginning to remake the nation into a far more conservative and religious landscape. As it turns out, far from being socially irrelevant, rednecks have been faithfully preserving conservative religious belief and practice through the last several decades of our modern yet waning secular winter. What many believe to be the last vestiges of a Christian age gone by are turning out to be symbols not of a Christian past, but rather its conservation, and increasingly, its future restoration. But while rural populations have faithfully preserved the traditional values of faith, family, and freedom, they have at the same time experienced extraordinary hardship in an increasingly globalized and cosmopolitan world. In 2016, J.D. Vance published a moving account of rural populations entitled Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis, where he detailed how globalized economic policies have devastated rural communities throughout the nation. In what scholars call a global division of labor, manufacturing and industry have been increasingly shipped out to third world nations, while capital and finance are relocated to urban centers, a process that has left rural populations highly unemployed. As age-old communities became reduced to rust belts, rural communities found themselves not merely mocked and ridiculed as rubes by our media elite, but completely forgotten and neglected by our political class as well. And then...
And we will make America great again. God bless you and good night. I love you.
Before the Donald Trump campaign, rural populations didn't have a political champion. And without such leadership, they failed to politically mobilize to effect any real change in American politics. But then, with MAGA rallies in dozens of counties that had never been visited by a presidential candidate before, Trump awakened a sleeping giant, a silent majority that was silent no longer. On November 8th, 2016, rural America shocked the political order, helping to make Donald Trump the first Republican in 30 years to win over 300 electoral votes. But the influence of rednecks goes way beyond America. The rural revolt that propelled Trump to the White House has inspired massive rural revolts in nations all across the globe. Shortly after Trump was elected, the massive uprising in France known as the Yellow Vest protests crippled the globalist policies of their president Emmanuel Macron. In Brazil, conservative rural populations rose up and voted overwhelmingly for Jair Bolsonaro, often dubbed the Tropical Trump, giving him a landslide victory after more than 30 years of Marxist rule. Populist parties began to see a surge in support in Italy, Sweden, and Canada, all as rural populations around the world began galvanizing together to not merely protect their traditions of faith, family, and freedom from globalist policies, but to actually defeat those policies and awaken a new patriotic political order in their place. And so, while the jokes will certainly keep coming and the stereotypes will refuse to die, rednecks will go on, well, being rednecks. They will continue to drive their trucks and wear their camo. They will continue to love their guns and, above all, worship God. And they will continue to inspire tens of millions all over the globe and embolden countless communities of world changers to overturn the globalist political and economic order with the timeless values of faith, family, and freedom. Who would ever have thought that it would be the redneck who saved civilization?